today with some policy experts and to talk about this most recent session, the election, and then what to look forward to for next session. Before I get started, I would like to thank our sponsors. Without their investment in Max, we wouldn't be able to do what we're doing. So thank you for your generous support. And for our agenda today, first we've got the election recap with Nick Fernandez, and then we'll go into the panel discussion moderated by John Helton. So Nick is on my team at the Metro Atlanta Chamber, and he will give us a riveting recap, I'm sure. I'm looking forward to it. So Nick, take it away.
Thank you, Amy, and certainly plan on doing my best Chuck Todd impression, and unfortunately don't have the big whiteboard that they all get, but certainly will do my best. But first off, let me thank Amy and Max for having me today. I appreciate you guys bringing me on, and appreciate the opportunity to give the recap. So first, we'll obviously start with the presidential election. So as many of y'all know, Vice President Joe Biden leads Donald Trump here in Georgia, still with the last recount to be done, hopefully, I think by today, by about 12,000 votes. And so historically wise, that is the largest vote share by a Democrat since 1980, when Jimmy Carter won with 55% of the vote. And then the last time a Democrat won Georgia was 1992 with President Bill Clinton getting around 43.7% of the vote. So certainly a seismic shift presidential wise here in Georgia. And where that win really came from is obviously the Democratic strongholds of Georgia, Fulton County, seeing almost a 60, 70 vote increase from 2016. DeKalb County seeing increases, Clayton County seeing increases. But where there was a lot of margin from 2016 to 2020 was in a couple of the ex-urban counties, Cherokee County, Fulton County, where when you're looking at a 12,000 vote margin, 25,000 vote difference in Cherokee County, about a 30,000 vote difference in Forsyth County from 2016, really helped lead to that victory for Joe Biden, and really drove home the chances of flipping Georgia blue, and certainly was a part of the game plan going into it. So with that, we also have the U.S. Senate races, which I don't think we all have not seen or continue to have ads blowing up our phones, our mailboxes, our TVs, but just a little context. The presidential or the U.S. Senate seat, the junior senior seat, special election previously held by Senator Johnny Isakson, will be going on between Senator Kelly Loeffler and Reverend Raphael Warnock. The senior U.S. Senate seat currently held by Senator David Perdue will be faced off against John Ossoff. A little bit of history on runoffs here in Georgia. So in the past 30 years, there have been 7 statewide runoffs, 6 of them won by Republicans. So certainly one of the reasons why Democrats as a whole are really, really throwing a lot of effort behind this, because they know historically they have not voted well for Democrats. The last Democratic victory ironically was Lauren Bubba McDonald for Public Service Commission, when he was previously a Democrat, who is actually now in a runoff on January 5th as well for his Public Service Commission seat. So, and then the last Democrat to win a statewide runoff was 2006 Attorney General Thurbert Baker in 2006. And then the last U.S. Senate runoff was 2008, when U.S. Senator Saxby Chambliss was forced into a runoff by losing the general election by about 0.02% of the vote. And then in his general election runoff, there was a 16% percentage difference between his general election result and his runoff result, and a 43% drop off in turnout. So that's why really between now and January 5th, everything is focused on turnout, because making sure people show up for the January election is crucial to both camps, and will continue to be the effort moving forward. Congressionally, we saw some flip in the District 7th seat by Carolyn Bordeaux, taking a seat previously held by Republican Congressman Woodall. State Senator Nikema Williams filling the late Senator John Lewis's seat in District 5, while Kwanzaa Hall is filling the seat for about a month and a half until the inauguration date. He won the runoff special election, and just got sworn in yesterday, and I believe will be holding the seat for about a month and a half. And then District 9, Northeast Georgia, it will be held by Republican Andrew Clyde. Northwest Georgia will be held by Republican Marjorie Taylor Greene, and then Lucy McBath will retain the seat in District 6, winning over Republican Karen Handel. So one of the highlights with our congressional delegation is that our female representation is at an all-time high, with 4 members of Congress and 1 senator. So certainly something to appreciate and be thankful for here in Georgia. Next, I'll move on to state elections. So while certainly a huge victory with presidential elections and flipping the state blue there, not a lot of, there was a lot of conversation, especially amongst folks down at the state capitol, about what the potential was for Democrats in this election, and even flipping the House, not necessarily the state Senate, but the potential of flipping the state House, narrowing those margins, making it tougher for Republicans here in the state legislature. But really, we did not see a lot of what Democrats hoped for. So in the state Senate, only 1 Republican lost, with Senator P.K. Martin in Gwinnett County to Nikki Merritt. In the House, you had Representative Brett Harrell in Gwinnett County, chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, lost his race. Republican Dale Rutledge down in Henry County lost to Regina Lewis Ward. And then Republican Deborah Silcox lost her seat up in Sandy Springs to Shay Roberts. And then Democrats also lost their House Minority Leader, Bob Trammell, who represents a West Georgia, LaGrange area rural seat, and lost that seat, and will be losing the House Minority Leader position. So overall, state Senate and House, not a lot of change in composition. Will certainly be similar numbers that we've seen the past 2-4 years, and will continue to be a Republican-held majority in both chambers, and a lot of chairmanships will remain, but there also will be some new members. So with retirements, we've got 36 new members coming in, 11 in the Senate and 36 new members, 11 in the Senate and 25 in the House. So there will be some new committee chairmanships open. Senator P.K. Martin, formerly the education chair, is open. 2 agricultural chairs, which have been long held in the Senate and the House, but the carousel of committee chairmanships will certainly get going, and we'll see a lot of new faces and new leadership come 2020. Last, I'll focus on local elections. So we've seen obviously a lot of our local counties trending blue, and this was kind of the last straw, I guess, for a lot of the formerly Republican counties around the area: Cobb, Gwinnett, Henry County. So in Cobb County, Gwinnett County, and Henry County will have all new commission chairs, Democratic commission chairs. And those same 3 counties will also have all new Democratic sheriffs. Also, Cobb, Gwinnett, and Henry elected their first African-American sheriffs in those counties. And then last, in Gwinnett County and Cobb County, 2 newly elected Democratic DAs. So a lot of those Republican strongholds are moving towards very strongly Democratic up and down the ballot. And then last, let me highlight The Gwinnett transit referendum, something we focus on a lot, have focused on a lot. Transit policy, obviously something Metro Atlanta Chamber is extremely interested in. Second time around, unfortunately, lost by just under half a point up in Gwinnett County. Certainly not the result we wanted to see, but hopefully some progress going into potentially another transit referendum and progress in the region as a whole towards transit policy. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions, talk about any of the potential changes down at the state capitol. Certainly, I will highlight one of the champions for workforce development this past year with our Second Chances bill, led by Amy, Houston Gaines, and then Senator Tanya Anderson, some others, Chuck Payne, some other folks that had a huge influence in that have retained their seats. We'll be back this session, along with a lot of other workforce champions down at the legislature. So losing some folks, but also retaining some great legislators that really have workforce on their minds and certainly want to continue the efforts we've made and the efforts that Max have made as well. So, but happy to take any questions and appreciate you guys having me on, and hopefully did my best Chuck Todd impression. I'm getting ready for the big screen one day.
Yes, you're doing a great job, Nick. Thank you so much. John Hammond, you've got your hand up. Did you have a question that you wanted to ask? We can make it so you can talk. There you go. I think you're still on mute. If not, in the meantime, I have a question. Like, there's been so much emphasis with Georgia going blue for the president, but that didn't completely trickle down, right? And so how does that bode for Georgia kind of being a swing state now? What does that look like?
Yeah, and there was actually a interesting graph I was looking at. So there was about 100,000 raw vote difference between Biden and Ossoff. And where those really differences were highlighted were in the suburban areas that, every pundit would tell you that, that's a referendum on Trump, his presidency, and the numbers certainly reflect that. So while we flipped blue this election, the votes down ballot certainly still show that there's some folks that either went and voted Vice President Biden and then either chose not to vote for Ossoff and Warnock, or chose to hold off on that election. But certainly, I think you will see stronger efforts. I think this will certainly keep folks interested and keep money flowing to Georgia in future presidential elections, future statewide elections, but the margins are growing thinner and thinner up and down the state, and certainly will continue to look that way. But really where Democrats have got to focus moving forward is those down ballot races, and either holding on to these voters that chose to vote for Biden this time around, or potentially watching them flip back Republican in the future years as well. So if Trump is not on the ballot, or his influence is not there on the ballot as well.
Well, I don't know about y'all, but I've seen enough money coming in, because I don't want to see any more ads. I'm done, and we've got a long ways to go yet. But Nick, thank you so much.
Happy to, Amy. I appreciate the time. Yeah, and to your point, I think I predicted at the beginning of the year that we'd be around 250 million potentially poured into this election, and I think the latest report I saw just for this runoff is that it's up above 300 million. So potentially, $500 million to $500 million, $750 million potentially poured into Georgia through this whole election cycle. So certainly not going to go anywhere, and we're only trending up. So it's potentially going to become just more and more money poured into here, and our TVs being the reflection of that.
Yes. Well, we do have one question. Melvin, did you want to go ahead?
Yes. Morning. Thank you, Nick. Did you happen to witness the Georgia State Senate Subcommittee hearing yesterday on the vote here in Georgia?
I saw a little bit of it, Melvin. saw a little bit of the earlier session with the Secretary of State's office, looking at some of the changes they'd like to make, looking at some of the options they're looking at for kind of to their point of hopefully continuing to restore the public's confidence and the vote and the outcomes. But saw a little bit of the beginning and what the SOS is looking to propose for 2021 session, but I did not catch a lot of the second half of it in the subcommittee meeting.
Well, I saw it, and it's, to me, House Seat 106, which I held before Brett Harrell. I was state rep down there. And what I witnessed yesterday, and this is the first time I publicly said anything about it, is very, very troubling. It's very troubling, specifically with the State Farm Arena, with that video that they just released yesterday. Is problematic. And I'm all for fair elections, period, for everyone, regardless of who's winning. It should be fair. And this brings about a lot of questions. And I would encourage everyone to take a look at that, because there are some interesting things there. And Governor Kemp has now come out and said he's in favor of the signature audit. He made that statement last night on national television. So something is there. That's all. I was just asking if you happen to witness that. That's it.
Yeah, appreciate it, Melvin. And yes, certainly we'll leave that up to the Secretary of State's office and the legislators that certainly are looking at law changes in the future and whatever they feel is best for the election system here in Georgia. And we'll certainly leave it up to them. And I just look to go vote next year and hopefully, I certainly think, everybody here wants to just know when they're going to vote that their vote counts, and certainly that whatever is just to reinforce that here in Georgia and makes every vote worth it here. So appreciate it though, Melvin.
Thank you, Nick.
Right,
Thank you. Thank you, Melvin. All right, so we are starting to get some questions that pertain to the entire panel. Nick, please hang around, because I'm sure that you'll be able to contribute to some of the audience questions going forward. We'll continue to take questions. I failed to mention at the very beginning to please use the chat box or the Q&A function or the raise your hand function, and I'll help monitor that. For the time being now, I'm going to pass it over to John Helton, who is Executive Director of Atlanta Career Rise and the Vice Chair of MAX. So John, take it away.
Thank you, Amy. Good morning, everybody. We're so glad that you all chose to begin the ending of your week with us and this particular panel. So as Amy said before, of course, we're glad to hear the update from Nick about the session or the election. I also want to welcome Leanna Brown, who's the Director of Government Affairs for the Metro Atlanta Chamber, Alex Camardelle, the Senior Policy Analyst for the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute, and Cosby Johnson, who's with the Georgia Chamber as VP of Government Affairs. So I'm going to moderate this, but I'm going to encourage Amy to please monitor the chat box as she said she would, and just jump in, because we want to keep this pretty informal. If our panelists can turn on their cameras and be ready. I'm going to start because I'm looking down the participant list here, and I see a lot of nonprofit folks here, as we expected would be the case. So Alex, I'm going to start with you. There's oftentimes a lot of confusion around advocacy versus lobbying and what we can and can't do as nonprofit leaders and in this particular sector. Can you speak just a minute to that particular issue of advocacy versus lobbying and just break it down for us?
Yeah, absolutely. And for those who are curious, I'm with Georgia Budget and Policy Institute. We are a nonprofit 501c3 nonpartisan research and action organization. We do have registered lobbyists on our staff, but we are again a nonprofit as well. And we do most of our work it's about informing the general public as well as our lawmakers through education. And I think that's the key distinction between lobbying and advocacy. So we have a motto that I'm sure many of us have heard before. While all lobbying is advocacy, not all advocacy is lobbying. Advocacy is any action that speaks in favor of, recommends, argues for a cause, supports or defends, or pleads on behalf of others. It includes public education, regulatory work, so doing administrative advocacy with state agencies or local agencies. It can also include litigation, and voter registration, voter education, and more. And whenever you're a nonprofit, the key thing to understand is the law and what the law says, what you can do and what you cannot do. If you're a 501c3 organization, you can do public education on issues in current events. So if workforce is your issue, then you can educate lawmakers directly in testimony, through hearings, or through public forums about a specific issue tied to workforce. You can also engage in direct or grassroots lobbying. Like I mentioned, members of my team, myself included, are registered lobbyists with the state. The key thing you have to do is disclose your activity. And as an organization, you will have lobbying restrictions placed on you based off of your organization's revenue and funding. So you have to track and disclose that. And if you register for the state of Georgia, you'll be required to do that on a weekly, bi-weekly basis during session, and off session, it's a little bit more spread out. What you absolutely cannot do as a nonprofit organization is you cannot endorse candidates or publicly support political parties. You cannot provide technical assistance or share any insights or draft any private memos or make recommendations that will not be provided to the general public. So if you provide any information to candidates or political folks running for political office, you have to also make that publicly available to the world. And then lastly, of course, you can't use any threatening language to hold elected officials accountable for their votes, which I hope is an obvious one. So John, that's a quick and dirty primer on where you stand as a nonprofit. I hope the key takeaway there is that as a nonprofit, you can advocate, you can even lobby. And if you have any other questions about how to do that from an organizational capacity building perspective, I'm happy to talk offline too.
I think that's a great explanation, Alex, and kind of differentiate it. But again, I think the takeaway is you have a voice and you have expertise that needs to be shared oftentimes. So that's kind of the key point there. And as we go through the session today, panelists, if you want to add anything, feel free to jump in. Cosby, I know that you're on the road and maybe a little bit more limited, but I may pitch a few questions specifically to panelists, but anybody else can jump in on that question too. But Leanna, if you would, I know we've got a variety of expertise levels on the participant list here. Just give us an overview of how does legislation get passed? How do you, from the idea of conception to actually going through it, how long does it take?
Well, remember that you're asking how sausage is made. So sometimes the answer might be kind of ugly. No, legislation, if you follow the normal expected constitutional process, takes a minimum of 5 days. According to the Constitution, every bill has to be read 3 times in each chamber, and on the third reading in one chamber, that can overlap with the first reading of the other chamber, and that harkens back to the days before we were able to quickly run off copies in the Xerox machine, if we even still have Xerox machines. That harkens back to the days when it took a long time to make copies, and we read everything repeatedly so that everyone knew what they were voting on. You had to hear it 3 times. So if you follow the normal process, a bill can take a minimum of 5 days. When it does get a little ugly, you can hitch a ride on a bill that has already passed through one chamber, and another chamber late in the hours on the very last day can pass something as long as it fits in the same code section of Georgia law. That process can get a little ugly sometimes, but as long as you do your homework and you have good relationships, you can make that happen. That's sort of the last ditch effort. But legislation can also take many, many years to pass. There's a tax issue that we've been working on. I think we're going into our 3rd session working on the issue. And that's still not a long time compared to other policies out there that other groups are working on. It can take many, many decades to get certain things passed. But the general process for us in a normal environment is it starts with policy ideation. It starts with us talking to our members about what's important to them, what is some barrier to their economic growth or their ability as a business to innovate? Is there some law in Georgia that's holding them back or that is harming their ability to recruit talent or other companies? So it starts with that process of identifying what the issue is, and then going to our partners and our other members to see how they're interested. Is this a non-starter? Is there some momentum here? Well, we're also working on this. It may include forming a coalition if a lot of people are interested. And then we typically run these ideas by a few legislators or staff members, a few trusted allies, to get their insight. They may know what the caucus has been saying internally about that issue. And then you start crafting the bill, start actually getting it written, find a legislator to carry that bill, both in the House and the Senate, start working on educating legislators. We start working on educating our members, the companies that are invested at the chamber, so that they aren't caught off guard by anything. And you just start building that groundswell of information, of people knowing what's going on. And don't ever take anything for granted when we're trying to pass a bill. If you assume that, oh yeah, it's going to get through committee, or this person's going to be fine, that's just not a safe way to operate. We will try to check in with every single committee member if we have a hearing, if we have a floor vote, kind of go down the list and see where we think things are with everyone. I've been burned before by taking something for granted on a budget item. We just assumed it was going to be fine, and it wasn't fine. So it can be a really short process. It can be a really long process, but you have to do your homework, and you have to really shepherd that bill through every single step of the process, because legislators and other lobbyists have a lot of things that they're working on. So it's up to you with your item to really keep it moving.
Okay, thank you for that overview. I'm sure there have been some surprises. I know some last year were surprising to me. So Cosby, I'm going to start with you for this one. And Anita Lee has asked a great question that I'm going to kind of expand just a little bit. But Anita asked, what as workforce professionals and people in the education and workforce sector should be looking at as we look forward to the next legislative session? But I'm going to kind of expand it a little bit by asking also, will you just tell us what's important in that arena, workforce and education, for your organization? What are your priorities in the upcoming session too? So Cosby, if you can hear me and speak, go for it.
Yeah, I hope you guys are catching me. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're great. Good sound.
Good deal. Good deal. I hope that the road isn't in the background. When it comes to education and workforce development, I really am honestly blessed to be able to work with Amy, Metro Atlanta Chamber, to work hand in hand on several different policies that we've worked on over the years. The thing that I look for now is fully understanding that the educational landscape has shifted. We've seen a lot of students and even those who are going back to technical schools and our university USG systems or TCSG system schools be really redirected with COVID, and trying to find a new way to learn and a new way to disseminate information. And not only with that new way to learn, we're also trying to find new ways to really find what level our students are on, to direct better help to them, and to figure out how in this new age of educating learners, we get that information to them. So for me and for our chamber, I think one of the major things that we will focus on, and that all of us have been focused on for a while, is really bridging that digital divide. And that just seems like the first place that we have to start. We've seen so many school districts kind of not only, we've seen larger school districts even struggle with making sure that they have, that they can fill the demand for people who need broadband, and that they have the capabilities for all students to learn in a way that doesn't detract from any student learning, whether they have high earners in the family or low income earners in the family. We must be given the same kind of education. So we'll be looking at bills that broaden the scope of what we need to be doing to throughout the state, understanding that that is now even education, but also post. Other things that we will be looking for is really the first part of this is there are a lot of student fees that are connected to tuition rates and things of that nature that aren't being utilized by students. As we understand, a lot of students aren't on campus as of yet because of this pandemic that we're dealing with. We also realize that those student fees can be, while they are low for some students, can be very high for other students and could really be an amount that keeps them from entering that institution, whether, again, that's TCSG or USG, to better themselves to move into the workforce. So we'll be finding ways or looking at ways to see if there are any small barriers, whether they be systemic or financial, that we can help remove during this time to make it easier to move into gaining a skill or furthering your education at a USG institution. And the other part that's connected with that is really last mile funding. A lot of our students, and I won't begin to throw out the numbers, Daniela, who you all work with a lot, I'm sure could spatter them off much better than I can. However, there is a growing amount of students who are not finishing college or at their TCSG institutions simply because of smaller amounts of money or fees that they can't pay or tuition that they can't pay towards the end of their college career. So we have a lot of seniors dropping out last year. We have a lot of seniors dropping out last semester. And what we want to try and paint to the state of Georgia and also institutions who are doing a good job working on this issue for themselves, such as the Panther Grant, Valdosta State down in Southwest Georgia has also worked on last mile funding to get their kids across the finish line. But we would also love to see some state investment in that to make sure that we are capitalizing on the investment that not only the student has made by going to these institutions for up to 3 or 4 years, but also the investment that the state has made in their K-12 education to ensure that they finish it out, to really create an atmosphere, I think, in this state for lifelong learners, understanding that, you know, even when you graduate, I think we've seen whether you graduate from TCSG, USG, that we will continue to have to retool ourselves and retool the way we learn and teach here in Georgia. And I think if there's one thing COVID-19 has shown us is that we got to be ready to do that. So I think those would be the highest line priorities for our organization.
Yeah, this year has shown us a lot, right? A lot of disparities. So Leanna, with the Metro Atlanta Chamber, tell us about the priorities and just add on and build from what Cosby started with.
Yeah, sure. Well, Cosby gave me a nice transition, actually, and I neglected to mention earlier when I was talking about working with your partners and your friends and trying to gauge where everyone else is in the process and what they're thinking. The Georgia Chamber is one of those partners and one of those friends, of course. If the business community is not on the same page, we have a problem. And so we check in with the Georgia Chamber regularly, and that's part of our process. So Cosby mentioned that last mile funding. That's something that is a priority for us as well. 2 years ago, we worked on needs-based aid. The House Bill 787 was passed by the legislature, and that creates a needs-based aid program. Georgia is one of two states out of 50 without a state-sponsored needs-based aid program. And so Amy in particular on our team works to pass that in 2018, but it had no funding behind it. And so sort of as Cosby mentioned, that's something that we're looking at for the state to put in place, and that's that gap funding for post-secondary education. And it would take the form of a scholarship that targets those seniors and others who are just close to completing their program. And for a number of reasons, we know that life gets in the way or just that one fine that you can't wrap up. They are unable to just finish those last few course requirements. And so there's a number of ways that we're pursuing this and a number of qualifications around it. It's important to mention that this does not displace the Hope Scholarship. That's a very important tool for keeping our talent here. But as Cosby alluded to, helping those students cross the line, cross the finish line is important for our state's investment in the students and for the students' investment. And that translates to a stronger workforce for us and a stronger economic recovery for Georgia. So we'll be aggressively pursuing that, and it's already in the works. I know Amy's working really hard on that one. We also are pursuing CAPS funding. That's the Child and Parent Support Program. We've known for years that, yeah, someone knows the CAPS acronym. I'm on the right call. We have known for years that affordable, safe, quality childcare is important for our workforce. And the pandemic has really highlighted that. If anyone wasn't aware now, they are. And so our goal is to boost state resources for the working parents who need quality childcare options through the CAPS program. Having access to CAPS means that our workforce can expand. They can potentially return to college. We can secure our workforce can be secure at work knowing that their children are in good hands. And it also serves the purpose of helping our students start off on the right foot. It gets them prepared for their K-12 education. So those are two of our main priorities heading into session. There might be some other things that we work on. And of course, everything can be upended just as soon as the gavel bangs on day one. So that's our plan.
Yeah, I bet a lot of people know CAPS on this call, so you're in good company, Leanna. So
Great.
Alex, we've talked a lot about the Georgia Budget Policy Institute platform coming up and the priorities. Share those, and from your perspective, what are you all working on and thinking about, which I know you've been thinking a lot lately.
Yeah, we actually overlap and share a lot of priorities with what Leanna mentioned. We've worked with Amy at the Chamber on need-based aid as well as childcare issues and a few other opportunities, and we've had some successes over the years that we're really proud of. So I think the power of collaboration is really kind of shining through right now. I'd have to just shamelessly plug my colleague Jennifer Lee, who works, hand in hand with Amy on student aid and student debt related issues, is actually going to be on Rose Scott in an hour to talk about student debt. So if you have a moment, feel free to chime in. She's been doing a lot of work on the disparities around debt and access to hope, and further underscoring the need for need-based aid. Our top priorities, budget is in our name, so fiscal priorities are top of mind for us. Our first and foremost, we're trying to raise revenue to support a lot of the priorities that are being discussed on this call right now. We are in a budget cut posture. We've had to make significant reductions in this current fiscal year. We don't anticipate any further reductions, but no cut is still a cut because we are working off of a budget cut. So we're looking to raise money where possible, and we have bipartisan support in both chambers to do things like raise the tobacco tax to the national average, which is just one proposal we have. That could bring in about $600 million in revenue to help restore funds for education, which got cut $1 billion in this current fiscal year. We also are fighting to generally just raise revenue for workforce development services. Those programs, your regular job training programs, short-term, non-credential programs, are disproportionately dependent on Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act funds, the federal WIOA funds. We believe that Georgia should appropriate more state dollars, especially since those federal dollars have been declining over the years. But there are also some braided funding opportunities. We can look at making sure that we're supplementing WIOA dollars with SNAP employment and training, with TANF dollars, et cetera. So there's a budget advocacy component to the session too, where we'll be injecting some of these ideas into the policy or the budget hearings and budget debate. In addition to fiscal policy priorities, I mentioned there is a lot of overlap. Some additional things we're doing to promote equity in our education system is to create or establish an opportunity weight that provides additional money to students that live in poverty in Georgia schools. We're also trying to shine a light on efforts to, unfortunately, divert state dollars away from our public schools through voucher programs and more formally evaluate those programs. We're also looking to support students learning English as an additional language in school by eliminating Georgia's requirements to only test students in English. And for older youth and adults, we're advocating, like I mentioned, to lower financial barriers to higher education, maximize the use of our lottery ticket sales and lottery reserves for education, which through this pandemic, as you all know, have been increasing, interestingly. And we want to support tuition equity legislation that expands access to higher education for undocumented students in the state of Georgia. So that's just a small section of GBPI's full policy priorities. We actually just made them public on our website today at gbpi.org, so you can go there if you want to see the full slate of what we're going to be championing starting in January.
That's a good point. I invite all the panelists, if you want to use the chat box to provide any links to your websites that have some of your platforms or issues, and please feel free to do that too. And just a reminder, I think Joy just posted this, but any questions, feel free to jump in. Participants, we'd love to hear and talk about specifically anything that's on your mind. But let me change course just a little bit. So as Nick alluded to in his presentation, a lot has changed at the federal level. We expect a lot of changes coming in the next year, couple of years. How do we think that's going to impact Georgia and the Georgia legislature specifically? And let me make this kind of a two-parter if you'd like to add something. We've talked about COVID a bit too. What's going to be the impact of COVID on the Georgia session this year, do you think? And how are they going to meet? How do you think they're going to meet? Cosby?
Yeah, I think the number one question is, I saw that in the kind of the email that came beforehand, which is, how do we lobby during this time? And I think that's something that if anyone has figured it out, they are, probably pulling in a lot of clients, because it is a very different world and a very different way of advocating than, we kind of had before. We have had conversations with House leadership and the new minority leader, James Beverly, as well as the majority leader, John Burns. We know that they are working together to kind of figure out what it looks like for the House, and then they'll agree with the Senate. So what it may look like as far as having lobbyists in the buildings, where the meetings will be. If it's anything like it was at the end of last session, I'm sure everyone on the phone can remember they had the legislators split up between several rooms throughout the Capitol. Very little contact directly kind of with those legislators, and you kind of had to find ways to connect with them more deliberately, whether that's in their office and not maybe catching them in a hallway, or finding time, spending a lot of time doing what we're doing right now, hopping on Zoom calls, hopping on telephone calls. But to be very honest, the advocacy of what you have to do and the efficiency of which you have to do it kind of doesn't change. It just changes the mode in which we kind of contact them and reach out to them. So for anybody on the phone who is looking to champion an issue, or you have a local issue that you're worried about, or anything that could be going on during session, I would say now is a perfect time to do what we always kind of push people to do, which is find out that personal information, give them a call directly, be your own individual lobbyist first for your own individual issue, and fully understand that, when they see my number coming in, they know it could be coming in for a myriad of reasons, and they know I am in the government affairs world. But when that call comes from an area code that they know, when it comes from one of their voters, that is always the most effective lobbying. So, don't be scared to pick up the phone, get their cell phone number. The one thing I always say is these guys are just normal people just like us. So reach out to them. The second part of the question, which is, for us at the Georgia Chamber, one of the things that we are going to be pushing to try and do, at least on a federal level, is sit back and wait. And that's not because we don't have efforts that are vitally important to everything we do. From the Georgia-Florida water wars, for anybody who may or may not be following it, new people being installed at EPA, new people being installed at SBA, and really watching or keeping an eye less on legislation, although we know legislation is extremely important, and a lot more on the regulatory environment. And we really feel like that's where we may see the most immediate changes, especially in the world that I work in, which is kind of the environment and energy space. So while we understand, there are some big things that will be overturned, there are some big things that will be put in motion, probably large pieces of legislation, or protecting the ACA, or things that lie, I think, on the front pages and the screens of everyone. There's also kind of another game being played behind that I think a lot of us who work in the government affairs world find ourselves working in, which is that regulatory environment, which is once the law is written, once you pull out of the climate the Paris Climate Agreement, that is a whole regulatory structure that also changes. So once we may, I would assume, probably be stepping back into that agreement, that is also a swath of new regulatory changes that businesses such as Georgia Power, AT&T, down to your mom and pop manufacturing companies are really having to think about and deal with and shift with the times. And we just want to ensure that we're giving our businesses, large and small, enough time to do it in a smart way that really doesn't affect the workforce development environment or workforce numbers as a whole. So,
yeah, Leanna, tell me about your thoughts on federal changes impact on the Georgia legislature and COVID as well.
Sure. I don't see the change at the federal level on Georgia being too terribly dramatic. I see two things happening. One, I think that Democrats at the state level will feel emboldened and they will maybe try to pursue things that they haven't before with that sort of federal backing, getting some of that federal pressure to help them out. Whether that makes anything happen or makes anything cross the finish line is to be determined. But I think that they'll get some support to pursue some policies that they maybe haven't in the past. I think on the flip side of that, we may see some of the Republicans who now potentially feel that some of their core values on the federal level could be threatened. I think that we could see them trying to act on the state level to protect those values here in Georgia. And I should not necessarily values of policies. It could be a tax issue. It could be a health issue. We saw years ago that the General Assembly passed a bill that prevented the governor from expanding Medicaid unilaterally without the state support. And that was a reaction. That was a way that the state was reacting against, that was a check against the federal government and against the governor. That's how I see that taking place. I see our legislators sort of reacting in the bills that they're going to introduce. That could be good or bad. So we'll see from both parties. It could be good or bad. And in terms of how we operate in COVID, hopefully the House is going to speed up their voting process because it took 7 minutes per vote last year. I've heard that they are going to. That would be wonderful. We ended up being really successful last session in June. And I don't know if that's because we picked the right issues that had some support or what it was, but we ended up being fairly successful. And as Cosby alluded to, it depends on your relationships. If you don't have a relationship with some of these people, it's going to be a little bit harder if you can't call them and they don't know who you are. That's going to be a little bit harder. So we're starting to build that now is really important for anyone who's got goals next session. At the same time, depending on who it is, some legislators are happy to take your call, even if they've never met you before. But we really do rely on building those relationships and making sure that legislators know where we are, they know what our priorities are. And we hope that that helps us continue operating effectively in this kind of weird COVID session. It worked for us in June. I hope that it will work for us next session.
Okay, thank you. Alex, I'm going to shift just a little bit and ask you to talk about a question that Darlene Lynch has posed to us about global talent. And, what do you think the appetite is for the Georgia legislature, creating a study committee or really moving on the concept of expanding our workforce through utilization of global talent?
Yeah, thanks for that. And Darlene and I have actually recently had this conversation, and I'm glad and really excited and eager about the work that the big partnership is pursuing to make this happen and fully support it. I think the consensus is there that we have folks who are major economic contributors in Georgia. But again, we have these really huge hurdles that prevent folks, or may even have a chilling effect on preventing folks from fully participating in our economy, right? So, and that is disproportionately felt by our immigrant neighbors, those who are both documented and undocumented. I mentioned earlier that we are still struggling to get in-state tuition for undocumented students in Georgia's universities and colleges. We have, unfortunately, the distinction of having some of the highest rates of ICE detainers in the country here in the Metro Atlanta area, through the 287G partnership, which also creates a chilling effect. At the federal level, we have the public charge rule that went into, well, is kind of suspended, right now, but is preventing immigrant families from pursuing safety net support and other things. On the 287G stuff, it'll be interesting to see. I think we have commitments from the sheriffs in Cobb County and maybe Gwinnett to actually lift those or to end those relationships. But I think once we start addressing those barriers, those, quite frankly, inequitable and unjust barriers that provide a symbolic, a symbol of, we don't want you here, then we can do a lot better job of welcoming in our neighbors and creating, more on-ramps to economic opportunity in all of our industries, not just the more typical industries like healthcare or any of the science and math fields, but also in construction, in transportation and other industries as well. So there's a lot of work to be done. I think we've, just going to candidly say, have a long way to go in terms of being a welcoming state. But through the workforce lens, I think there's a strong opportunity to change the narrative and create more opportunities for folks. So, and there's a lot of work. I know the state chamber is doing a lot of work on that in creating a more welcoming Georgia for the workforce and many others. But again, fully support and really excited about the work that BIG is doing, and with the legislators and with those with the potential of creating a study committee. I think we have an opportunity to flip the narrative through that. Like that would be the vehicle to do that.
Great. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about redistricting. I'm going to pose this to whoever wants to jump on this one, and the potential impact of redistricting and that process. Tell us what the process looks like and what we may anticipate with new census numbers and the new tone and tenor. Leanna, do you want to can you start with that?
I will try. The redistricting process is something that I admit I have not been a lobbyist since that happened last. But the legislature will come back in a special session later this year where they will have to present their drawn up plans and they'll have to vote on them. And then those plans, of course, have to be approved. Governor's office has to approve them, and then they have to be signed off at the federal level as well. So that's one thing that we can expect to see with a different administration at the federal level. They're going to have to play to both sides a little bit more than they maybe would have previously. But the way that I expect it to impact us is Republicans are still in charge in Georgia, so they're going to draw the map in such a way that they're going to continue to hold on to both chambers for a little bit longer, for a significantly longer amount of time. I know that before the election, Democrats, that was part of their narrative, that in order to have a seat at the table, to have a real seat at the table for redistricting, in order to keep the Republicans from solidifying their control for a few more years, we've got to win the legislature. And because that did not happen, but Republicans they're fully aware that the dynamics are changing, particularly in suburban Atlanta. They know that if they don't hurry up and change those maps, they're going to have more and more people losing their seats. So I expect to see them changing those maps to their favor.
Nick, I know you have some interest in this as well. Could you add any color or commentary to the question?
Yeah, and I certainly, talking about composition and just kind of what that looks like. So 2010 to 2012, the Georgia House moved from 113 Republicans to 119, which, may or may not be a direct reflection on redistricting. And then the Senate moved from 35 Republicans to 39 Republicans from 2010 to 2012. So certainly redistricting plays a part in making those margins that much bigger for the majority, whoever is in the majority at that moment. And to Leanna's point, certainly Democrats were hoping to be in a more favorable position going into this redistricting process, but just with the minimal gains they made in the state legislature, they're certainly going to struggle through the redistricting progress, and unfortunately might see a similar result from 2020 to 2022, just simply due to the maps and what they could look like going forward.
Great, thank you for that. Alex, Brandon Ona has asked a question about what's the low-hanging fruit here in terms of what do we think we can really move on in this upcoming session in terms of bipartisan support? What are your thoughts on where can we go with that?
Low-hanging fruit, man. So that's a good question. I was actually going to mention, because of the redistricting debate, it's going to be easy for all of the priorities we talked about to be pushed to the side. There will also be, a lot of election reform debate, given the status of things. So I'm really, I'm hoping and wishing that we can stay focused and get some good things done. I think, some of the issues that, are tied to the budget, I think are low-hanging fruit. We've created a lot of noise around education and the lack of funding for education. And we have Republicans who fought really hard to pull Georgia out of austerity and restore education funding and fully fund education. And we just slip back, dramatically in this current fiscal year. So if we can make progress in restoring those funds, I think I think there's a lot of momentum to do that in the upcoming session. We just have to find the money, raise the revenue, and there is bipartisan support to, to do just that. The other issue that my colleagues on the panel raised is childcare. Childcare is a massive barrier to getting engaged in work and staying in work. Finding affordable, high quality childcare was a problem before the pandemic. Only 1 out of 7 families that are eligible actually have access to Georgia's Child Care Assistance Program. So we have got to make sure that we protect it from any additional cuts. We were able to do that this current fiscal year. We got to find ways to raise more money or even direct some of the additional federal relief that we're, fingers crossed, hoping gets included in the upcoming federal package, funding package, to expand access to childcare subsidies for workers in the state. So those are just two things to consider. But I would be, cautiously optimistic always about what we can actually accomplish. Like Leanna mentioned, it could take years to get, these things done. We are at the start of a 2-year session, the biennial. And a lot of unknowns are happening at the federal level too, that I do think will determine the legislative priorities in the upcoming years ahead. And Brandon, I know you know this well too. So those are my thoughts. Leanna, did you want to chime in?
Yeah, if I can, I'd like to build on that. And Alex, you mentioned the childcare funding piece. The iron is hot right now, so maybe we could strike it because I think everyone's aware now more than they were before. But 2 other things I wanted to mention: the gap funding that I talked about earlier. In our conversations so far, there seems to be support on both sides because we're not talking about these sweeping, massive scholarships. These are targeted items. They're very doable, and there's a model in place. As Cosby mentioned, the Panther grant, there's a model there. And so that seems to be something that the governor's office is interested in. So that one is one. And then also SB 288, record restriction, second chances bill, which we worked on last year. That I believe passed unanimously in both chambers. So Nick, everyone's nodding their heads. So yes, it passed unanimously. But so that's some great bipartisan support, and everyone knew that that was something that was needed and it was good policy. So we think that there's more we can do there.
Okay, final question. We've got 1 minute together now. Final question. Let me ask Nick, what committees do we need to watch, and how do you think the change in committee chairs is going to impact us? We talked about, or Alex referenced the biennial, but for specifically committee chair changes.
So you've got the House chairmanship and the transportation chairmanship in the House up for grabs. I know it's still one of the leading industries, so agricultural chairmanships is up. Oversight over MARTOC, which was left by Representative Deborah Silcox, plays a big role in that, and typically held to a Republican in the past in the Fulton County delegation. So we'll be interested to see who's picked for that. Education chair, obviously Senator PK Martin will be a tremendous focus going into next session. And then it's really the carousel after that. There's obvious ones that are open, but it's a matter of what folks want to go and take, and then what that leaves open, it could create a domino effect that could lead to, what is now 12 open chairmanships to potentially 25, 30 potential open chairmanships. And then all the subcommittees underneath it, and appropriations and, judiciary and others, that could potentially change over. And also I will say the judiciary chairmanship in the Senate as well. Senator Jesse Stone, who's held that position for a long time, that he retired and that seat's open, which has continuously been a committee where a lot of important legislation flows through. So that will play an important role as well.
Thank you for that. It's 10 o'clock. This flew by. Amy, we need another hour for this conversation, I think. So I think we'll revisit this next quarter, maybe even while we're in session. But guys, thank you for sharing your expertise. Thank you for the topics you brought up. Let me just challenge our participants. You've heard these topics. We bring the stories to this, and we bring the faces. So as they're doing their jobs, just be prepared to be able to help tell the stories and provide the background and the actual examples of why this is important, because we're on the ground doing the work every day. So with that, mark your calendars. December 18th, 9 a.m. is the last max minutes for the year. Amy, what's the topic? You know?
It's going to be a surprise.
Ah, okay, good deal. All right, watch your email. Y'all have a great Friday. Take care of yourselves and be safe. Thank you for joining us today. Bye-bye.